Have you ever heard of this very obscure national park that is in the middle of nowhere in Nevada, and it's like one of the least visited national parks in the US? Because I definitely have never heard of Great Basin National Park. In fact, it was a mistake that I even ended up there to begin with. However, I went there during fall and it was just such a happy accident. And honestly, I really loved one thing about Great Basin National Park, and that is photographing Great Basin National Park. So let's talk about how you can get photos that barely anyone else has. Hi, my name is Alexandra and I am an adventure blogger and a travel photographer, and I run a blog called The Bucket List Mermaid where I help you live adventurously through your lens. And today we're going to be talking about how to photograph one of the most obscure national parks in the US. And I get it, it's in the middle of nowhere, it's hard to get to, no one really knows what it is, but it is so underrated and the photography opportunities are chef's kiss. Let's get started. So first off, let's talk about why Great Basin National Park is a photographer's dream and why you should even care in the first place. Now, number one thing that I noticed about this national park is that there is so much variety of things that you can photograph. I mean, I photographed this really old bristlecone pine tree, and then I photographed a glacier, and then I photographed a cave, and it was all within a 24-hour span. Basically, your SD card is going to have a little identity crisis in the very best way possible. Now, reason number two that I really liked this spot as a landscape and adventure photographer is because it is not very visited, it is less crowded. Yes, I saw a couple people on the trail and on the road, but it really was not as bad as like Yosemite and Arches and all the other places that I was going, where I was having to like manually edit people out in Photoshop or like wait like 30 minutes just for the shot to clear. This is not going to be like that. It is definitely more chill and it is easier to get a photo without people in it. Another reason that this is a very good park to photograph is that it is prime for astrophotography. You might have heard me mention that this park is probably not very popular because it is literally in the middle of nowhere, and that is true. And that also means that there is very little light pollution and the astrophotography is spectacular here. So are you sold? If you would have told me this, I would have actually made this a part of my itinerary instead of accidentally stumbling upon this in my RV. So let's talk about what gear that you should pack. These are two of my favorite travel cameras, and I actually do have a video comparing these two cameras. This is a Canon 5D Mark IV, and this is a Canon EOS M50 Mark II. This one is obviously a lot cheaper than this one. I took this one for the majority of the time since I was hiking some pretty long distances in this national park, but this one would probably be better in low light situations. As far as lenses, this is a 15 to 45, and honestly, I shot most of my stuff within this range. At the 15mm mark, you're gonna get those wide, sweeping landscapes. Now, this lens does go up to a 45, which I would recommend bringing some sort of zoom lens, just because you can get those wide angle shots, but then you can also, you know, kind of hone in so you don't get too much distortion. For example, one of my favorite focal lengths to shoot landscape and travel photography is 35mm, so I would get that with this lens. Now, if you do want to bring a prime lens, which less glass in the lens equals more clear, I would recommend bringing either a 35 prime or a 50mm prime. I know so many photographers who like that just never leaves their camera ever. And if that's your style, go for it. Another thing that I would recommend is getting a zoom lens that's a little bit more telephoto. For example, I do have a 70 to 200mm, and I really do prefer this sometimes because I like the way that it compresses the landscapes together. And I also like how I can really zoom in on my subject, because sometimes you'll get some wildlife, you'll get some birds, you'll get a cool lake or a rock in a lake that you can't reach, and you do just kind of need that zoom lens in order to get in there. So again, I know I rambled on a little bit, but here's what I would recommend if you are bringing lenses. I would recommend a standard zoom lens, maybe a 15 to a 45, maybe a 24 to a 105, like what's on this. If you are going to bring a prime lens, either do a 35mm or a 50mm, and then also bring a standard zoom lens. I would either bring a 70 to a 200 or a 100 to a 400, depending on what you're photographing. Whew, that was a lot of information on lenses. Sorry! I do have an entire guide on like the best lenses to do in travel photography if you are interested. So if you just like listened to me ramble for the last minute and like stared at me like a deer in headlights, that explains it a little better. Another thing that I would recommend here, especially since we talked about this, it is a dark sky park, is a tripod. If you're gonna get any long exposure shots, like in astrophotography, you are going to need a tripod. Now you can have a big sturdy tripod like everybody uses, but let's be honest, I'm an adventure photographer, so most of the time I am hiking miles and miles to get to where I am photographing. So a lot of times I do not want to be hiking a huge tripod, so a lot of times I will just take this little guy. You know, it's better than adding the extra weight to my back at this point, you know? So yeah, just something like this, super cheap, super easy. But other than that, I would keep it light, keep it simple, and just have fun. Now let's talk about the fun part, which is where to photograph in Great Basin National Park. Now my ultimate photo spot that I loved, and I mean loved, was Wheeler Peak Scenic Drive. Now this is a quick drive, it's nothing too fancy. It took us about an hour to do, and then we went hiking about 10 miles after, right at the top near Wheeler Peak. But this scenic drive is where it is at. I would 100% recommend coming before sunrise. Again, I'll say that again, come before sunrise and potentially come during fall. We went during sunrise and fall, so we got those beautiful golden hours all in those golden leaves. It was like a fall masterpiece. It was so beautiful. There are also some spots for you to pull over and take pictures, so this was probably my favorite spot to photograph in Great Basin National Park. And it's just a beautiful drive, so would recommend that. Now, as I mentioned, we did stop at the end of Wheeler Peak Scenic Drive, and we did hike about 10 to 11 miles all throughout this little like Alpine Lakes loop. You can go all the way up to Wheeler Peak, and I think that is very spectacular, but we chose to do the Alpine Lake loop instead. We saw 2 Alpine lakes, and I believe it was Stella and Teresa Lake. I even brought my tail. I'm called the bucket list mermaid for a reason. I bring my tail everywhere and I take photos in my tail. And I got a picture by the lake in my tail on this hike. And then we also did a little detour on the Bristlecone Pine Trail and the Glacier Trail. The lakes are absolutely stunning. The trees and the fall foliage on this trail is like something out of a movie. It is so, so, so beautiful. One of my favorite places that I've ever photographed in fall. Now, as I said, I also went up to the Bristlecone Pine Trail and the Glacier Trail, which I would definitely recommend if you can. And this is because these trees are incredible. They're basically found in certain elevations here in Nevada and in California, and they are extremely old. In fact, they speculate that these are some of the oldest trees on Earth. If you have the chance to do the deep dive, this video is not about these trees, but these trees are so, so cool. So if you have the chance to do some research on bristlecone pine trees, they are absolutely so cool. So fun to photograph, especially if you have that telephoto lens or even like a macro lens. You could get some seriously cool detail on these trees. And then you just hike to a glacier, so then you get to photograph a glacier. It's so fun. Again, there's so many things that you can photograph here. And now a really fun one that is unique to Great Basin National Park is the Lemon Cave. It's like Lehman, so I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Now these are the only thing that are very, very crowded and very, very popular. Great Basin National Park is not, but these caves are. So you need to make reservations a long ways in advance. And it's a really, really cool cave system. Plus, they do have some artificial lighting in there that does help you out. But the photographs that you can get in this cave, I actually think are like my most successful cave photographs. I'm not a cave photographer, so I'm not an expert in that, but I think I got some pretty cool shots in this cave. Cannot miss this if you are in this area. It was so, so cool. But I'm a cave girl, like I just love caves. I'm not good at photographing them, but I like them. Now another great place to take pictures of those sweeping wide-angled vistas is Mather Point and Desert Vista. These are really, really good for those sunrise and those sunset spots. You get some really, really cool landscapes here and astrophotography. Now if you are coming during sunrise and sunset, I would encourage you to come at least 30 minutes before or after, just so you could maybe catch some of that blue hour. Blue hour is so overlooked and it's kind of hard, but if you have a tripod, you can just create these like moody blue, like twilight almost photos. Now speaking of astrophotography, let's talk about it because it is very big here. It's at middle of nowhere. Literally nowhere. Like, to put this in perspective, I parked my RV at this place called Border Inn, and I was literally on the border of Utah and Nevada, and it was so remote. We were literally on what was called the loneliest highway in America. Like, that was literally its name, was where we parked the RV. There's nothing here. I think Baker has a population of literally like 13 people. That is what we're talking about here. Anyway, makes for some great astrophotography, so here's some tips. So best places to go for that astrophotography, I would stick to Mather Point, that Wheeler Peak Scenic Drive, and then there's also a thing called a Baker Archaeological Site. This was right by our RV, and it's technically outside of the park, but there is nothing there. I actually went to a sound bath yoga session there that the lady from the grocery store invited me to, just like out of the blue. I was like buying some milk and she was like, you want to come to my sound bath at the Baker Archaeological Site tonight? And I was like, sure. Anyway, great spot for astrophotography. If you are going specifically for astrophotography to this area, I would probably try to go between June and September just so that you're not freezing while this is happening, and I would try to time it to where there is no moon. If there is moon, the skies are just not going to be as clear. You're not going to get that Milky Way stripe over the top because the moon is just going to be just shining its light and kind of ruining everything. You can get some good moon shots. There you go. See, it's not a total loss if you're here during a new moon. There are some external apps that you can use, like Photo Pills is one of them, where you can track the Milky Way so that you can kind of see where the Milky Way is going to be. So that is an option for you to strategically plan your astrophotography shoot here. Now, if you do want the camera settings for astrophotography, I will put them right here instead of reading them out and boring you to death. However, these are just like the basic settings you may need to tweak depending on the situation and experiment a little bit, but here are some to help you get started. Now let's step away from astrophotography and just talk about seasonality with Great Basin National Park. Obviously, my favorite time to come here is fall. Just come here in fall. The trees, amazing. The trees, in contrast with the sunrise and the bristlecone pines, amazing. So cool. So that's when I would recommend coming. If you are coming in winter, just be careful because the roads do have a tendency to close. As for spring and summer, these are more peak time seasons, so you're going to need to get your reservation for the caves a lot farther in advance. There's not a lot of places around here, so you gotta just strategically plan a little more. Now, just some practical tips for visiting Great Basin National Park. The closest town is Baker, and don't expect a Starbucks. In fact, I could barely find a grocery store. Again, the population is like 13.5, so just keep that in mind when you are planning your trip as far as lodging goes. Another thing to keep in mind too is that the air can get a little bit thinner up there, especially near Wheeler Peak. I believe it's around 13,000 feet, so just keep in mind for altitude sickness, always take care of yourself before your camera, you know, yada yada yada. And also, I just wanted to remind you just to leave no trace, because this is a beautiful untouched paradise and we want to leave it better than we found it, especially as photographers. I also have some sample itineraries for Great Basin National Park in my full guide. I will link that below. It is on thebucketlistmermaid.com. You can go ahead and check that out for even more information that I am giving you here right now. So those are all my tips for photographing Great Basin National Park. If you do end up going to Great Basin National Park and photographing to your heart's content, I would love to see your photos and cheer you on through all of it. I have so many photography resources just to help you out and get the best pictures possible while you are adventuring. And if this video was helpful for you, it would mean the world to this traveling mermaid if you would just support my small channel, hit that like and subscribe button so that I can keep bringing you free adventurous photography content. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. We will see you next time, and here's to living adventurously through your lens.